But yeah, today we're going to be looking at clay. So yeah, I mean, clay occurs in quite a lot of places. If you're lucky enough to have it on your site, it's great because then you don't need to go very far to get it. But the flip side of it is there might be other issues around working with clay if you're ramming tyres, for example. Yesterday everyone was ramming with chalk, and ramming with chalk is a very, very different experience to ramming with clay. Clay's very dry. Obviously it's a really nice hot sunny day, so the clay we've got here is particularly dry. But once it gets wet, it really soaks up moisture very quickly. It tends to expand, and when you're filling tyres with it, it can be a bit of a nightmare really, because you end up with more stuck on you and the hammer than's actually in the tyre. So yeah, that's not so good, but it can be a little bit difficult to work with. I heard anecdotally that when they were building Earthship 5, it rained solidly. My colleague George, who helped build this, worked on Earthship 5 before we worked on this project, and he was saying it rained solidly for like the 2 weeks that they were doing all the tyre work on the U's. Yeah, it's apparently it's an amazing site, overlooks like a loch, but it was raining continuously whilst they were building, and yeah, because their soil there is clay, the soil that they put in, it massively expanded, because once it gets wet it sort of expands about 25% of its size, and it went in, expanded, and then once they'd finished the building and the building started to warm up, moisture started to come out and the tyres started to shrink. So yeah, it's really important when you think about ramming tyres to keep your material dry. In fact, any earth that you're working with, you have to keep it dry, but it's particularly important with clay. So yeah, if you're lucky enough to have it on your site, that's great, because you can just mine it directly off your site, just scrape off the topsoil, because you don't want anything with plant matter or leaves or humus or whatever in it, or roots. Get down to the substrate, that's good healthy clay, that's what you want to be working with. But if you don't have the advantage of having it on your site, like here for example, we didn't have any at all, we ordered it in, and I found a supply quite local to here, and I order it in for these courses, like bulk bags of it. So you just ring them up and you say, I want, I don't know, a few bulk bags of it. It costs, I think they were like 30, 40 quid a bag, and it is a very expensive way of buying clay if you go down that route. But the point is, for us, we don't need that much clay, because we use, I don't know, maybe like a quarter of a bag a course, something like that maximum. But if you're doing it for yourself, you probably want to order in quite a large amount really. So I guess the first thing I'm going to ask you to do, if you can grab a handful of clay and maybe just a little bit of moisture. I'm just going to get some water in the bucket.
You have to go to find clay in your own garden.
It really depends.
Just keep going until you see it.
Well, no, I mean,
some places don't have any at all.
Oh, then how far do you go then?
It depends really. I mean, it just depends what geography and geology you've got on your site. It's as simple as that.
Survey that.
So like this one you say you can't find, how far do you go and how much do you look?
Well, very bizarrely, the other day, I found this company by looking on Google about 2 or 3 years ago, but the other day I happened to be driving through the Crawley countryside, just not too far from here near Gatwick Airport, and I happened to drive directly past where the company are based. And I looked over and I could see their sort of big diggers like excavating, lots of clay. So yeah, it's not so far, it's probably about 30 miles away or something like that. But I mean, ideally with earth, and it's one of the main advantages with ramming tyres, is you just use everything as close to site as possible. And because it's a very heavy material.
No, I'm talking about my own land, you see. I've got
in
land.
Malaysia, I've no idea what soil's like. So is it clayey?
I don't know. I don't even know how clay look like. It's supposed like this.
Well, there is a
It doesn't really look like that. You never know what it's in the ground.
Yeah, I mean, there's a really simple test that you can do. You can get like a jam jar of water, and you dig up whatever earth you've got. You have to, whenever you're building with earth, you can't use topsoil. There's lots of reasons for it, but it's basically no good to us. So we get the topsoil out of the way, and generally speaking, it's probably no more than a foot, 6 inches to a foot maximum. But we put that to one side, and what we're interested in is the substrate. Basically, it's inert earth that's not going anywhere. It's probably been there for a very long time. In this case, it's chalk, but you really want to just dig down on the land that you've got and see what's there. And I mean, if it's very white, you might find that it's a sort of chalky type thing, but if it's sort of brown, then there's probably a clay content. But most stuff tends to be sort of somewhere in between, really. And so,
salty sandy clay.
yeah, exactly. So I'm watching what I say because I know you're an archaeologist, so probably your intense knowledge of Earth is probably better than mine. But the point is, you can just get a handful of whatever that substrate is, that soil below the topsoil, pop it into a jam jar and give it a shake, and then see how it settles, and it will tell you, because the biggest stones in the sample will fall to the bottom, and then it sort of slowly grades itself. It takes probably, I don't know, an hour or whatever for it to happen, but it all separates out, and you can roughly see. I mean, it's not very scientific. You can, I mean, if you really want, you can send the soil away for analysis, and someone will send you back a very technical document that's quite hard to understand, but it will tell you exactly what's going on there. But this is a sort of at a glance way of just testing any soil, and you can roughly see what the sort of silt content is, clay content is.
Particle size, clay is the finest.
So yeah, to start with, if everyone can grab a handful of clay and a little bit of water and just work it into a ball, that would be fantastic. About stopping heat getting into your structure in the first place, and stopping the moisture getting in as much as possible. Those are probably, on average, the two things that you're going to try and do the most. So if we think about quite typical sort of hot, humid climates, we end up with very lightweight sort of bamboo timber structures where there's maximum amounts of airflow through it, so that the heat's got no opportunity really. Well, it can get in, but it gets straight out again. It doesn't really build up in the structure. So I think that materials such as this are fantastic for rendering, but they embody sort of thermal mass into the structure. So it means when the heat comes in, a little bit of it's going to get soaked up, and then it stays there. So it's a question really of just looking at the climate over the course of a year and working out what it is that you predominantly want to do. So for us here, it's heating because it's a temperate climate, but if it's a hot, humid climate, then probably cooling is the thing that we want to do the most. So we might not want to think too much about using materials, like we might want to use more lightweight materials. But I mean, the
example of that would be lightweight
just timber frame, very light timber frame, bamboo structures with the back.
And no rendering.
Probably no rendering. No. Because the heat is going to come in, you can't really do much about that. You can design the building with overhangs and everything to stop the sun coming in. I mean, yesterday Becky was telling us about the sort of angle of the glazing and the fact that there's no overhang to sort of maximise the amount of sunlight coming into the building. Well, if we were in a much hotter climate, we would probably find that in summer it would be far too hot inside the building, so we'd probably want to limit the amount of sunlight coming in. So we'd probably go for more of a vertical face, and then you can put a little shelf over the top, and it's very easy to just calculate how far you want it to be, or you can just go for like half a metre or whatever. And the point is, in the lower points of the year when it's cooler, the sun can penetrate directly in, but as it gets higher and higher, sort of towards the summer, you've got that overshadowing which limits the amount of sunlight that gets into the building, so it doesn't overheat as much. So it's just things like that really. It's just sort of optimising it so that heat once it's in is a problem because you've got to deal with it if it's a hot climate. So the trick is to avoid ways of it getting into your building as much as possible. And people have tackled it in lots of different ways. I mean, there's lots of cultures that build sort of down into the ground. I was cycling in France a couple of summers ago along the Loire Valley. It was lovely, but there were these loads of like troglodyte houses, and it was quite strange because my girlfriend's derailleur fell off of her bike, so we had to ring up the bike people, and they came along and they refitted it for her. And then they were saying, well, don't go along the river, go along the hills because there's lots of interesting houses. And so we cycled up into the hills, but yeah, there was these amazing cavernous houses just cut right down into the hill. And it's punishingly hot there. It was a really, really hot day. But inside these sort of underground houses, they were just very big, thick, obviously stone walls, just very, very cool. So it's just stopping heat getting in the first place. That's obviously a bit of a different strategy. The middle of France isn't a hot sort of tropical climate, but not yet anyway. Maybe it will be one day. Everyone's had a chance to play with the clay now. How do we feel? What do we think it would do if we just render it straight onto a wall now, just as it is?
Crack when it dries, when it holds together.
So you think we need to put something with it?
bind it.
Yeah.
Bind it.
And that's the key point really. If you put really rich clay on and in very thickly, it just slowly over time it just cracks like the ground does, and then falls off the wall. So
that's where the bill come into it.
Yeah. So the next thing we're going to do, if you'd like to form into small groups and basically grab a bucket, we're going to mix a little bit of clay and a little bit of sand and see how we get on. Yeah. Well, however much you make, please put the same amount of clay as the same amount of sand, so 1 to 1. So if you
I've seen it used with a straw.
What we've made.
See those messy hands.
Well, it's nice. I like it. It's like double cream.
is get some moisture onto the wall, because basically
because you want it to, it'll stick to it.
Because if you don't, the first thing, I mean, this is a bit of an extreme example because it's just falling straight off, but otherwise what happens, and it's the same last weekend, we did the decoration inside the Earthship, we were working with lime putty, and it's exactly the same principle, and we went along with a little bit of lime putty, we filled the hole, but if we don't just pre-wet it first, the first thing the wall does is suck the moisture out of the new material that's going onto it, and once it's done that, it tends to fall off. And in our case, it was just like little hairline cracks and stuff, but this is a bit more extreme. But yeah, the thing to do is to wet the wall a little bit first. Out here, it's you can basically put on as much water as you like. If you're doing it inside or on your own home, it's probably better to be a little bit more controlled with the amount of water that you put onto the wall. It does, yeah. Well, it can do. So that's it acts as a binder. Of doing sort of as little as possible really and getting the maximum out of it. Some people would call that lazy, other people would call it permaculture, but it's effectively the same thing really. So we could spend a long time getting that clay and pounding it down and getting it into smaller bits, or we could just spread it out and let the sun do the work for us. The sun's an amazing thing, it's burning away in the sky, so it's just best really to just spread our clay out very thin and let that happen. And this is not perhaps the best demonstration because this has already been griddled. So basically all we do is just pick our clay up, pour it into a griddle, then griddle it, and then some bits are too big, don't make it through, just pop that to one side. And basically just work through your mix, and eventually you end up with quite a volume of clay, and that's a sort of really good material to start with. Because effectively, you can just work with clay that arrives in big lumps of it. It's just a bit of a nightmare to work with really. So the sort of first process is preparing your clay and making it so it's a lot easier to work with.
So do you add water to it and then spread it?
No, at this stage just keep it dry.
You spread it and you leave it in the sun and the sun breaks it?
The sun basically just dries it out, it's just pulling all the moisture out of it. And so you can just pack it down with a hammer or whatever, or the back of a shovel, just break it down, and eventually it starts to get quite granulated, and then you can just scoop it up, chuck it through a griddle, and you end up with sort of nice kind of product that you can work with. So yeah, it's just a sort of easy way really of, I mean you can buy clay in that's someone's already done that too, but you just pay for the privilege. And for the work that we're doing, this is perfectly good enough really. I mean, if you wanted a really fine finish, you could buy like something like potter's clay in for the very final layer, but it's so expensive that you wouldn't really want to use it for much else. Yeah, it's a really good question. If you're probably not going to be able to finish your wall in one skim, which is to say one layer, you're probably going to want to put several on. And so the last thing you do at the end of the day when you've put a layer of plaster on is go over with a nail or a comb or something like that and just scratch into it, and the reason is it gives the next layer something to bind onto. So when you put the water on. Exactly. When we came over to that wall, for example, although the wall was a bit dry, once we made it moist, it was very easy to just push the material, skim it onto the wall, and the wall it grips the wall because it's not a smooth surface. There's lots of stuff for the material to grip onto. And if you've just got a perfectly smooth wall, the next layer it's going to be much more difficult for that material to actually stick to it. So yeah, we basically just create a key on the wall which gives the next layer something to grip on. Different way of mixing. And we're going to come back to this in a moment, but I'm just going to show you now. I mean, basically put a little bit of water in a bucket, and I may have put too much in, and then just add pure clay to it. And keep going.
So why are you trying to do this one? What are you trying to prove?
Slightly different way of mixing.
Oh, right.
This is a sort of lazy way of mixing.
Oh,
4 shovels and half shovels.
Just depends really. The trick is not to add too much water, but every
Guess
time
you
I ever do
you learn
this,
to
I
judge
always
it,
add
don't you, if
too
you've
much
been doing
water.
it for years, so.
you're going to put sand as well?
No.
Oh, no, just clay. Okay.
No, we're eventually going to add straw to this, but
Okay.
the first thing to do is just to leave it to settle and to sit. See, this is the thing, is you keep adding it and the water keeps moving up, so I'll add another couple, see where we get to. Should have done it. Excellent. Right, we're just going to leave that now. Lazy mix now, and the way this works, let's go over there to the straw. Yeah, the lazy mix is another way of basically mixing, because we're using a different binder this time, so we don't need to really worry about putting in sand and the proportions with the clay, because it's just pure clay. So I put some water in a bucket and then I kept adding clay to it until, roughly speaking, the water was up to the level of clay, and it sort of sits there. This is going to be quite an immature mix. Ideally with this technique you want to leave it a couple of hours because it just enables the clay to sort of soak in the water and sort of reconstitute itself. But we haven't got a couple of hours, so here's one I did earlier. So you get a handful of straw, and the idea is that you just drop the straw into the material and then you cover it, just coat it in the clay, and then you've got a nice big kind of solid. And this stuff is incredibly good for packing out because we're using a lot less material. We've got some straw in there, so it bulks it up very, very easily. And yesterday when we were ramming the tyres, you could see that there were quite large gaps where the sort of 2 tyres meet. This kind of material is absolutely fantastic for filling that gap, filling that hole. So yeah, we've got this material here. Let's go and slap it on the wall.
What's used as a base there on Watland North?
It could be, yeah. Just looking for a nice gap to fill. There you go.
Bish bosh bash.
It's coming out!
Suddenly the wall falls down. But yeah, I didn't wet the wall obviously with that first, but
Did you use the same ratio for the clay mix?
it was just pure clay.